I hope you're seeing all this okay and you're ready to rock and roll. I've been an EDIUS editor since version 1, so I've been around the block a few times, and when I got the chance to play with Boris Red, I realized that EDIUS is a great tool and a great editing platform with all of its ability and stability, but Boris is great for those times you need just a little bit more than what you may be able to do in EDIUS. Just wanted to fill you in real quick on my specs on the system I'm using, because people tend to ask those questions sometime. I'm actually using a Sony laptop. It has an i7 740QM processor, NVIDIA 425 graphics card with 1 gig of dedicated video memory. So it's a fairly capable machine, but a very usable machine that you could pick up off the shelf at one of your big box retailers. So you can see this all works fine on just regular systems that people can afford. So now that you know what we're using and what we're playing on, let's get started with the presentation. First thing I want to cover is Chroma Key. As you can see, I've got a nice background image here, and if I unmute my upper track, I've got a green screen model here that we're going to play with and stick her on top of our other footage. So to do so, it's real easy. We just go to our effects palette. We find our Boris Red plugin. I'm going to drop that on my green screen clip, double click the filter to bring up the user interface. Now, you can see this isn't the best green screen around. There's a little bit of shadow over here. I'm not sure how you're seeing it on your monitor, but on mine I've got a little bit of a shadow. It's very subtle. And then right down here are some stripes. It looks like there's a water spot or a stain right on the green screen. So let's see how well Boris can handle that with the Chroma Key. To add a filter in Boris, we click on our video track down in our timeline, and I'm right-clicking, and I go to New Filter, Keys and Matte, and go to Chroma Key. If I want to, I'm going to delete that. Another way to find your filters is to make sure your video track's highlighted. Go up to Filters in your menu bar, and the same thing. It's just a second way to get there. Normally, I'm going to be working down here, so I won't use the menus much, so you'll see me working in this position most of the day. All right, we've got our Chroma Key added, and like many Chroma Key setups in other applications, you can either pick the color by using your color selector, or the easy way, you click the eyedropper and go click some green, which I'm going to do. Okay, so I've clicked some green now, and you can see we've keyed out most of the green. I'm not sure how it's coming through on your screen, but I've got a lot of, it's like almost snowy. It's not a real good key in there. If I come up to my output and I click Show Matte, you can see we haven't done a real clean key quite yet. There's a lot of gray in here, and that should be black. So if we were to go with it just that way, we're not going to have a very good key. So Boris has a function called a matte choker, which is under our keys and matte selections. And if we select that, you can see, I'm going to go over here and click on my View Matte, that it's really cleaned the bad green screen in the background up. But at the same time, I've also lost some detail. It's for worst case scenario green screens. You can see the amount of hair up here and stuff on this particular model that matte choker is knocking out. But at least we're able to get the green screen out of there and get our key in a much cleaner setup. So I'm going to turn it back and turn off the View Matte. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to add a filter that Boris has that makes your green screens look a little more lifelike. It's called a Keys and Matte, and it's called a light wrap. The function of the light wrap is to reflect background footage from your scene onto your image so it looks more lifelike and not as harsh. Let me show you how some of this works. If I'm on my light wrap and I clicked on my background, oh, sorry, I got to go up here first. There's an option here, Use Background Track Set in Timeline. So if I click there, then I come down here to my background track. I'm going to go and I'm going to use my V1 track media here. I'm going to go and actually select the clip, which is this one that I used in my background back on the EDIUS timeline. Now look what's happened. You can see the reflections of the background right on our model there. So if I come up here and turn that on and off, you see the difference. And if you want to see how it works, as a reference, I'm going to actually come down to an open area and go to New Media and select a movie file, which I'm going to bring my original clip in from the timeline. And there we go. It's at the top, so I need to move it down so I can see my green screen. Okay, here we go. Now, if I turn my light wrap on and off, you can see the difference. See, here it is off, and it's kind of a harsh edge around her. But if I turn that light wrap on, it gets to be a much more natural look. If I come up in my light wrap and set it to wrap only, whoop, let's turn this thing off. You can see how it works. You see where it's creating the lines and the reflections on her. If I wanted, I could ramp up the lightness and I could change the way all that's interacting. I'm going to pretty much leave it as it was because for our example it's satisfactory. I'm going to turn the wrap only back off and come back and unmute my back channel. Now we've got our subject fairly well keyed here. It's not a great key, but it's much cleaner than it started because we had a bad green screen behind her. But we've got one other little problem. Our model was shot in a studio with controlled lighting and white balance for a studio, and we're putting her on a bridge in an outdoor white balance setting. So her white balance doesn't quite match what's on the background. So let's work with a little bit of quick color correction and see if we can rectify that. To do so, I'm going to right-click on my video track, go to New Filter, Colors and Blurs, and I'm going to pick the three-way color grade. Okay, over here in the left is our control panel. Anytime we're working with a filter or anything, whatever's highlighted, right now my video track's highlighted, I've got tabs across here where I can control stuff related to that. Right now I'm going to highlight my color grade, and as you can see, these are the filter controls for my color grade. So I'm going to start working with this a little bit and see if I can get her to match my outdoor white balance a little bit more. First thing I'm going to do is work with my gamma. Now these are called the gamma, the lift, and the hue. If you're an EDIUS editor, and I assume you are because you're here for an EDIUS broadcast, then you're used to seeing in the white balance filter black, white, and gray. Well, the mid-tones or the gray is our gamma. The lift is the same as our black, and the gains would be our white. So if you want to equate those with the white balance filter in EDIUS, it might help you understand which ones you're playing with as you're manipulating them. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my gamma and I'm going to run that up towards the magenta a little bit. If I click on the crosshairs, then I can pull it. You see it's going really slow and I'm moving a whole lot. If you hold down the shift key, you can grab a hold of those crosshairs and you can do a much quicker change. So I'm going to be using the shift most of the time today. I'm just going to go up a little bit on my gamma. Then underneath, this is the luma control for your gamma. You can either slide this left and right, or this is like a jog shuttle. So if I click out here to the right, I can make it go one click to the right and I can change it. See, you can probably see that getting lighter or darker. I don't want to go too far. Just about one click or so is pretty good. Now I'm going to take my lift and I'm going to do the same thing. We're going to go up towards the magenta a little bit. I'm holding my shift key down to make it easier and quicker. And then my gain, I want to move down towards the cyan and blue just a little bit. Okay, as you can see, the colors have changed slightly to make it a little bit more balanced. Coming down the filter, we have an exposure and a saturation. We're just going to come down and mess with the saturation a little bit. I'm going to drop that down into a negative number just a little bit so it's not quite as saturated and rich. Now, if we want to see how well our work is progressing, we can come up here to the compare mode and we can do it side by side. On the left, you see what it looked like before we touched it, and on the right, you can see the changes we've made, so she matches a little bit better with the background. So we've got this one pretty much set up. We're looking really good with that, so I'm going to apply my changes and head back to the timeline. There's two ways to do that. Right down here, there's a cancel and apply button, or I like the little check mark right here by my composite window. If I click there, we're back to our timeline. And as you can see, we have our nice keyed footage. Now I've got another piece of green screen footage that I want to show you. And when you see this, you're probably going, oh my goodness, that is just one nasty green screen. I did some searching one day and I found for another tutorial I was doing this site called HollywoodCameraWorks.us that has all kinds of green screen Chroma Key footage that has all kind of problems with it. And you can imagine what the problem with this one would be with this blue shawl and the mesh in there. So just for fun, let's see how well we can handle this with Boris Red. Drop my filter on, double click the plug-in to open the interface. Again, I'm going to right click, new filter, and if I want, I'll come up here to Keys and Matte and go to Chroma Key. This particular one, we're not going to use the matte choker or the light wrap. I think we're going to get a good key just with the Chroma Key. So first I'm going to click on my eyedropper and click on the green. And as you can see, we lost a lot of detail in here. I'm going to come over to my output setting and click it to show matte so I can see my key. All right, now let's play with some of the controls and see if we can improve it. In Boris, you've got controls over here, and some of the filters will have these little round circles with handles on them. Sometimes it's easier to work right in your composite window because as you're dragging stuff and moving, you actually get to see the results without having to glance back and forth. These, as you can see, here's the density. Here's my density. Here's my lightness. There's my lightness. So each one of these correspond to these. On this particular example, I'm actually going to use these controls right here in the composite window. If I slide my density up, you see I'm starting to pick up some of that mesh. And if I take my lightness, oh, that's not the right direction, so let's go this way. You have to dial this one way down. Now you can see I'm able right now to see through some of the mesh, but I can still pick it up, but I'll be able to see my background through there. And whoop, we don't want to mess with the lightness anymore. The balance, I think we're going to leave the balance somewhere around here. Let's tweak the lightness just a little bit. See, our background just went gray on us because we went too far. So we've got good blacks there. I think that's a happy balance. Let's see how that looks. Let's turn off the matte. And I'm going to do like I did in the last one and add my lower track to it so I can get a good comparison. I was using this sunset shot. And I'll drag it down to the bottom. And now look, we've got a pretty darn good key right there. I mean, that's looking really good considering what we started with. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close. I believe if I come up here on my Chroma Key to the spill suppression, I might be able to help it just a little bit more. If I take my spill ratio, see if I go up too far, I'm going to start picking the greens up. But if I drop it down just a little bit, I think I can get rid of some of the remaining green in our blue fabric. Now one thing to look at over here on the left where my mouse is, there's a little red line there. And as I drag it, the blue line is active. That little red line just shows you where you started. So sometimes you're adjusting stuff and you say, oh, it's all messed up. Where did I start? I can't remember. Well, that red line is your reference point. I'm not going to go very far off of there. I'm just a tiny bit down on my spill ratio. I think I've cleaned up some of the greens that were left in the fabric, and I haven't affected her skin tones yet too much. So we've got a pretty nice key there, I would say, just with the Chroma Key. Very few editors have a Chroma Key ability to pull off that kind of a key that easily. I think we'll keep that as it is. We'll hit the apply button and return to our timeline. And there we have a nice key, even with that hard to use scarf and mesh in the background. Okay, we've played with Chroma Key now. Let's move on to some color correcting. I'm going to come to my next sequence, and I've got this shot of a gentleman sitting at a desk. It's kind of cold and dark looking. It could use a little help. So let's see how we can fix it up with Boris. This is a fairly simple fix. Drop our Boris onto our clip. Double click the filter for the user interface. This time I'm going to right click on my clip and go up to my colors and blur and pick the three-way color grade again. And once again I get those same three color wheels. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my gamma or my midtones, and I'm going to move towards the yellow-red with those. Holding the Shift key down makes it a little bit easier. All right, you can see the background and his skin tones are warming up just a little bit. We're not going to go crazy with that. And then I'm just going to come down to my exposure. Oh, let's play with the Illuma a little bit on that, see if we can help it. Yeah, we lighten that up just a little bit. So we've moved a few clicks to the right, and we've got a little bit brighter yet now too. We're going to come down to our exposure. which is set to 0. Let's move that up just a little bit. That looks pretty good somewhere in there. And now you can see we've taken a cold dark setup and we've added a little bit of life and a little bit of extra color, and it even looks a little bit deeper too. So that's really all we need to do on that one. So I'm going to click Apply Changes, back to our timeline, and again, if I turned off my filter, you can see the before and after. The next clip I'm going to use is I've got this sunset image, and it just seems dull and flat. It's almost like the shooter knew he was outside and wanted to mess around with some iris settings, and he actually put too many ND filters on it and just flattened it out. So let's add some life to this. Let's use our Boris filter and double click to open the interface. Okay, same just like we did before. We go down to New Filter, and this time we could go in here and do all that, but it remembers our last filter. So I'm just going to click there, or I could hit Control F and it would just drop it on. So let's go play with the color wheel some more and see if we can spice up this dull, flat-looking image. First thing I'm going to do is take my gamma, and I'm going to go towards the yellow and red. Add a little vibrance to it there. I'm going to use my luma, and I'm going to go to the left on this one a little bit to kind of darken it down a little bit. And I'm going to take my lift, and I'm going to go towards the red with that one. There we go. And we want to use the luma to the left on there a little bit too. Give it a little bit more darkness and contrast. And our gain, we're going to move that one towards the yellow and the red, not quite all towards the red. So add a little bit extra yellow in there. And we're going to also do the luma to the left of center. Okay, now I'm going to come down to my saturation levels, and I'm going to turn the saturation up and add some color to it. As you can see now, we've got a nice looking, a better looking sunset from a flat and dull boring. We've added some color and we've added some life to it. Not a whole lot more we really need to do with that one. And I think I'm going to apply and exit back to my timeline. The next sunset that we've got to play with, this is actually one of my favorite ones. The way it comes out is just beautiful. We're going to take this cold blue sunset and make it more warm. As you can see, there's some pretty colors going on in our background, and we're going to kind of play off of those and enhance it and make it much more vibrant. So I'm going to take my effects, drop the Boris on, double click to open up the interface, and once again we're going to use that same three-way color grade. All right, this time we're going to come down with our color wheels and get them where we can work with them. I'm going to move the gamma towards the yellow-red until I start seeing some colors appear. Look how the reds are now reflecting into our water, making it a much warmer, prettier water reflections. I'm going to take my lift, I'm going to move that towards the yellow-red as well, and bring out even more of those beautiful colors. And then the gain, I'm going to also run that one this time towards the red magenta instead of yellow and red. And look what it does to our sunset. It just kind of explodes with color. Let's take the exposure and play with that a little bit. I'm going to move that up just a little bit, not a lot. Now, one thing to notice over here, there's a little box and I got a dashed line in that. This is your keyframe interpolation, or how the filter's actually being interpolated. It defaults to constant, and there later on we'll work with some other ones and I'll show you how that works. But when you first move it, that will appear, and for what we're doing now, we want it to remain constant. So I'm just leaving it as it is. But we'll dive into that a little bit more in a few minutes. Next, I want to play with the saturation a little bit. Let's run that up. We're going to run that up fairly big. Somewhere around there looks pretty good. Now look what we've done to this. Here's a possibly nice looking sunset. It probably was pretty, but if we turn that on, look at the vibrance and the life we've brought to that clip. Just with a few simple mouse clicks, we've got this beautiful sunset at the beach shot here. It's really all we need to do to that. So I'm going to click the check mark to apply and return to my timeline. The next set of fun that we're going to have with Boris is we're going to work some with film effects. So I've got this shot here. Looks like a European city with river and boats and all kind of fun things going on. I'm going to drop my Boris on there. Double-click the filter to bring up the user interface. This time, instead of going to the colors and blurs, I'm going to go to my effects. Let's see, maybe it's the FEC effects. We're going to go to our effects. That's it, effects. And there's one called film process. That's the one we want to use. All right, you can see this is probably a sunny day. It doesn't look like it's overcast and cloudy, but it doesn't look real sunny. It's another one of those, or maybe they had an ND filter or something on and it just flattened the image. That's probably a blue sky in there. Well, once I've got this film effect or this film process filter on my clip, you can see up here in my control panel I've got a bunch of options where I could use those myself if I wanted to get crazy and just create and manipulate it all different kinds of ways. Well, Boris has made your life a little easier because they've created some presets for you to use. That means you don't have to do all the work. You can either click here on the load, the L button, and it will bring up the presets that you're allowed to use for this particular option. Or if you click right here where it says current, it will bring up all the ones that you're allowed to use as well. For this particular one, we want to find the one called color push. There, look what that did to our shot. One simple click and we've made the shot much more usable. I think we can play a little bit and make it even better. So up here along the top is a post-process tab. Let's go there and let's play with that a little bit. I'm just going to mess with the brightness just a tiny bit. Let's ramp that up a little bit. You can see what we're doing with that. Now we've got this beautiful shot. It's a lot brighter. Doesn't look like it's a gloomy day. We got a nice pretty sky. The greens in our metal roof have come out. We're picking more reds up off of our boats. You're seeing some yellows, and it just looks a lot deeper of a shot. There's a lot more depth and beauty in this shot where it was flat and pretty boring before. So we've really done a good job on that one. Let's run with it. Let's click the apply button, and back to our timeline we go. The next shot we want to play with, I want to take this video clip and make it look like old archive film footage. To do so, I once again use my Boris filter, double click, open up the user interface, and I'm going to go once again to my effects. And this time, instead of film process, I want to select film damage. This is like an old movie filter. Pretty much every editor has one of these. This one has a lot of fun ways we can enhance it. As you can see, we're playing this, and it's got some water spots and scratches, but it doesn't look real archived old footage. As you can see, there's a guy with a pretty contemporary haircut in here with a red shirt on. It doesn't look real old-fashioned, so we kind of need to hide all of that. So let's go up to our presets, and we're going to select the preset called Old BW, or Old Black and White. Okay, so now we've kind of muted some of those colors so the viewer's eyes aren't going to see that as easily. And as we scrub through there, we can see we've got small remnants of bad film stuff going on. So let's fix that up a little bit, make it a little bit more fun. Let's go to our scratches tab across the top. These are all things that we can do. I'm going to go to the scratches. I'm going to take my density and I'm going to run it up to a fairly large number, somewhere up in there. And I'm going to take the random seed, the scratch random seed here, and we're going to go up a fairly significant amount in there as well. Somewhere in there looks pretty good. The scratch width, let's double that from about 0.5 to a 1. Somewhere in there looks good. And the opacity, the max opacity, let's just bump that up just a little bit from where it defaulted to. Okay, so now as you can see, we've got much more blatantly obvious scratches and things going on in there. It's probably a little bit more than I would use to make it look that way, but for our examples, we're showing you the abilities and how some of the options work. So we're going to go with that. Now, one thing let me show you. If I hold down my Control and my 0 key, I'm doing what's called preview to RAM. And you see these little yellow lines appear across my timeline. That's the progress it's making. I don't have to wait for the whole thing to preview into RAM before I can start seeing the results of my work in real time. If I hit the space bar, it'll play that looped region where I've previewed the RAM. Now my understanding is you can't actually see my video playing back in the preview to RAM on your end of the internet out there, so I'm not going to use that function anymore today, but I wanted to show you how the preview to RAM works, and you can see the progress and how fast it went through there. Okay, we've got our old archive film completed. Let's click the check mark and return to our timeline. Our next one is we've got this really nice, either it's a sunrise or a sunset, and we want to make it look like nighttime. So let's drop our Boris plugin or filter on our clip, double click to open the user interface. And we want to take this clip of a beautiful sunset probably and make it look like it's shot at night. It's a common effect that's sometimes used used to be used a lot in movies, might still be, and you see it sometimes on occasion in TV land. So let's see if we can make it happen. We're going to right click, new filter, effects, and we're going to go back to our film process right there. Let's go back to our presets. Once again, Boris has done the hard work for us. And let's select the one Hollywood Day for Night. Okay, so now it's much more muted and sort of looks like the moon, bright moon may be shining, or right when there's just about no light left, but it sure looks flat to me. So I think we can work with this film process a little bit and make it look a little bit better. So let's go to our post-process tab again, and let's take our brightness and let's dial that down a little bit and darken it down. Okay, we've gotten some of that hazy look out of there now. And let's take our contrast, and I'm actually going to dial the contrast to a higher number. Let's move that up somewhere around in there. And you can see we got a cleaner. It was sort of hazy before, and it looks a whole lot like it might be like right after sunset, or either that or we've got this really bright moon. But it could fool a viewer into believing they were seeing some footage shot at night with maybe a light off to the side. So we've now made a day for night. There we were before, the daytime, and now it's nighttime. So we've got that looking good. I'm going to click on my check mark to apply and back to the timeline. Okay, we've worked with some film processes, some film looks, a green screen, couple of chroma keys. We saw how Boris can have a lot of fun with those. Now let's go play with some titles. Boris has some really good title features and abilities that will actually work side by side with your EDIUS titler for those times where you need just a little bit more than what the titler and EDIUS is able to provide. Well, Boris can do some pretty cool stuff, and we're going to dive into a few of those things now. So the first thing I want to do is create a lower third for you. To do so, I'm going to drop my Boris plugin onto my clip, double click, open up the user interface. Now, I've got this clip and I want to create a lower third. So I need to create a text track so I can work with it. To do so, there's an option here called Add Text Page. If I click on that, I open up the text generator, and this is very similar to what you may see in pretty much any editing application or title application. There's not a whole lot different about it, so it should be familiar to it. I'm not going to dive into lots of the functionality here. We're just going to use it. I'm going to call this lower third title. Now, as you can see, I've typed in, but nothing appears up here. Why is that? Well, I need to come down and click on my update button. Whoa, that's a little big. Let's see if we can tone that down just a little bit. Let's keep we've got it on Arial Black. We're pretty much just going to use that text font for most of the day. Let's dial that down. Let's see what 36 looks like. Again, it's changed here, but it's not changed in my composite window. Why is that? Can somebody tell me? I heard somebody. You have to hit the update key. Now, we've got this text that's pretty bland and boring. It's just white text over a background. Well, Boris has lots of neat little styles that you can select from. Over here is a style palette. If for some reason when you bring Boris up the first time or you're using it and you don't see your style palette, there's a little button down here called Style Palette. If you click there, this will pop up. Now, there's a drop down of preset style palettes that they've already included and created for you. I'm going to actually come and select the one called See-Through. All right, so I'm going to have some transparent text with border. I'm going to scroll down and find the one that says Lemonade. I'm going to click on there, double click, and as you can see, my text now has a yellow border with a transparent text. If I click the update, it appears in my timeline. Okay, so we've got our text there, but we really don't like it because you can't see it very well. So let's go back to our timeline and let's start playing with that a little bit. Okay, first thing we want to do is, this is not a lower third, it's a center third. So if I click on my actual text track, I can take my position arrow and let's drop it down to where it becomes a real lower third title. Okay, got that done. Now if I come back and click on my face track, up in my control panel, you'll see some options up here, and there's one called backdrop. Let's click on there, and I want to put a backdrop in there so I can put a background behind my text and see it better so it doesn't disappear with the footage behind it. Okay, so now I clicked on the Make Backdrop track, and if I come down here, I've got a new subtrack under my lower third title track called Backdrop. This is where I can define my backdrop. So we've got a couple of options up here. We've got a fill, which is what we want to do. We want to put something in there. Right now, the fill option is not activated. If I click on there and activate it, you can see we now have a background on our lower third, except that's a rather annoying orange. So let's fix that. We can use our color picker and we can go pick to our heart's content. Or if I use the eyedropper, I'm going to actually come take a red off of my bus. Okay, so now I got a lower third background that matches closely the footage in my, or it matches the footage, so it's more color coordinated, if you will. But a lot of times you'll see a lower third that has transparency, so you can sort of see through it, and it just makes the text stand out. Well, I can dial my opacity down so it should become transparent. But look what it did. It didn't really become transparent. It just got a little darker. Basically, I desaturated my red. Why is that? If you look, you can see there's a drop shadow here. So if I come up to this option here where it says shadow, that might be my problem. I go, oh, look, I've got a drop shadow turned on. If I turn that off, I've now got this nice transparent background behind my text, and I've got the lower third text set up just the way I wanted it to be. How about that? So if you do create a background on some lower third text and for some reason it's not going transparent on you, it's because your shadow's turned on. Just come in and turn off the shadow box. See, if I turn that back on, the transparency goes away. So we've got that all set up. We're good to go. Let's click the apply. Back to our timeline we go. And you can see we've got our nice lower third going there. Okay, let's have a little fun now. Let's animate some titles. First, I'm going to use this pretty picture of some sunflowers, this footage. Let's drop our Boris plug-in filter onto our footage and open up the user interface. Okay, once again, I need to add a text track. Can someone out there in internet land tell me how to do that? I think I heard somebody yelling at their computer. You use the Add Text Page button. Okay, so I will use the Add Text Page. Let's type in the word sunflowers. Now, do you notice that when I typed in the word sunflowers, Boris adopted the exact same text properties from the last time I used my text generator? That's the way Boris works. Every time you do something in the text generator, it's going to take what you did last time as what's current. Sometimes that'll be a good thing, and sometimes you'll need to reset it. We'll get into that in a little bit. But I wanted you to notice that it's the exact same font, the same style palette, the Lemonade that I was using on my previous text. So this is probably a little bit small sitting there over the sunflowers. Yeah, it's a little small, plus it's transparent. So we need to play with this a little bit. I'm going to highlight my text, because if I don't, my changes won't work. I'm going to ramp that up. Let's see what 72 looks like. Let's see what 96 looks like. I think I'll go back to 72. I think I like 72 better. Okay, so I click Update, and I see my changes up here. Now, I've got this transparency thing going, which I'm not real fond of because it's kind of hard to see the letters. So along the left side of my text generator are some tabs. This first one The second one down is called color. All right? And the fill is not activated. If I click on that, you can see I now have fill in my sunflowers, except it's this ugly blue that doesn't really go with our scene. So let's do some fun stuff with it here. I'm actually going to just pick a gray, hit the update so we can see it, and I'm going to change my opacity and drop it down a little bit, somewhere down around 40 range. That looks pretty good. Okay, so now you can see I got some transparency. My letters stick out a little bit. It's looking pretty cool. So I'm going to go back to my timeline, click on my sunflowers text track. Now up here along the top in my control panel, there's an option called Composite. If I come up here, there's an option here called Apply Mode. This is similar to the blend mode you may see in your current editor as a filter option or as a keyer option, or even in Photoshop, I believe it's called blend mode or overlay. And many of these descriptions are the same thing that you're used to seeing in those applications. For our purposes, I'm going to pick one called Scale Multiply. And what it does is it determines how the foreground text is going to interact with the colors in the background as far as mixing the colors go. I'm going to work with this a little bit to enhance it because it still is a little bit hard to see. I'm going to take my contrast. Let's move that up. Well, somewhere in there looks good. See how it pops a little bit more off the screen? I'm going to play with the gamma on that setting a little bit. Run it up a little bit more. Somewhere around 1.5 might be a good number. That looks pretty good. Okay, so I've got my text looking a little bit better. So I'm going to go to my Position tab now, and this is where we start having some fun. We're going to start playing now. Okay, first thing I want to do is I want to show you there's a key button down here, Toggle Animate Static Mode. I'm going to turn this on. What that does is when it's turned off and I manipulate a keyframe or create a keyframe, it defaults my keyframe interpolation to a hold or a constant. You can find out what those settings are by going to this Options tab, and there's a keyframe tab, and you can see my default interpolation, when I turn that key on, it's ease in, ease out. Otherwise, it's going to be a hold. For what I'm doing, I'm going to start animating now, so I don't really want it on hold. So I'm going to go back to Controls. I'm going to turn that on. I'm going to make sure my first keyframe is highlighted, and I'm going to make sure my cursor is at the beginning of my timeline. I'm going to go up to my Position Z up here, and I'm going to dial that backwards to a negative number to make my text just a little bit bigger. You can see over here my keyframe interpolation defaulted, like I said it would, to ease in, ease out. Well, I don't want ease in, ease out. I want accelerate. So I'm going to change that to accelerate. Now I'm going to come to the end of my timeline, and I could either click down here, or if I just click on the keyframe at the end, it'll automatically bring my cursor there. And I want to set that Position Z to a minus big number because as I go smaller, my text gets bigger, and I actually want it to fly off the screen and disappear. Somewhere around there looks really good. So now I've made my text animate to grow and fly off the screen, but that's not what I want to do. I want to create a push on this particular text where it actually pushes back and then flies off the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my text out here, a few frames back from the end. Right along there looks like a good spot. And I'm going to actually make sure I don't have any keyframes highlighted, so I can just click on my track there and you see that keyframe got unhighlighted. And I'm going to take my Position Z and I'm going to run it up into a positive number. See how that keyframe got added down there on the right? So I'm going to run this up to a positive number about as big as we started on the negative end, somewhere around there. So now that took an accelerate keyframe, which is fine. What it did is it adopted the keyframe interpolation from its previous keyframe. So if there had been nothing there, it would have done ease in, ease out, but it took the one that I had before. So now if I scrub my timeline, you can see it push back ever so slightly as I'm coming down through. And then when it gets here, boom, it blows up and explodes off the screen. So we've now got our push all done. So we've now animated some text and had a little bit of fun with it. So let's do a little bit more to it. I'm going to come down and click on my face, the face subtrack underneath sunflowers. Up across the top are some more tabs that we can play with. Next thing I want to do is I want to click on the jitter. Let's make our text jitter and bounce around a little bit, kind of like it's had a little too much coffee this morning. So we've clicked on the jitter. I'm going to set my cursor at the beginning of my timeline so it'll adopt it all the way through. And we don't want to keyframe any of this, so we'll just take the defaults. I'm going to set my speed, which is at 100 right now. I'm going to drop that way down. Let's drop this down to around 25 or so. That looks like a good number. I'm going to come up here and set that to constant and turn my key off because I don't want that putting ease in and ease out anymore. I'm going to take my jitter position X and I'm going to move that up just a little bit to about a 1 or somewhere around there. Okay, you can see the Y also moved along with it because my two are chained together or linked together. I'm going to click on that and unlink them and move the Y back because I want the Y to stay at 0. Now I'm going to set my jitter position Y back to 0. I've already done that. I'm going to take the scale and I'm going to run that up to scale X. I'm going to run that up to about a 2, somewhere up in there a little ways. And I'm going to take my angle and I'm going to increase that a little bit as well. Ooh, that was a little too far. Let's go back some. Right about there looks good. Now when I scrub my timeline, you can see my text jittering back and forth like it drank a few cups too many of coffee this morning. It's still pushing back. It gets out here to this keyframe and it still flies off the screen. All the while it's got its jitter going. Now if I did a preview to RAM and let it play in real speed, you would see it much more, you know, in real time, but you can't see it on your end, so we're not going to go there. One more thing that we do want to do and have a little bit of fun with this is we're going to use this type on effect now. We're going to actually make our text appear as it's being played, as the timeline moves down, as the cursor moves down the timeline, our text is going to type onto the screen. To do so, I'm going to make sure my first frame, key frame is highlighted, put my cursor there, and I'm going to take my text type on. Let's turn our key back on for this one. And let's turn that all the way down to 0. You see what happened? That's exactly what's going to happen as we keyframe it and play it on the timeline. I'm going to turn this to accelerate. And I'm just going to come out a few frames somewhere out in here. Make sure nothing is highlighted as far as keyframes. And now I'm going to turn my type on up to 100. So now it's completely on. See how that works? Just that easy to create a type on. I'm going to set that keyframe to a whole because I want it to stay there for the duration of my clip. So now we've got text that types on while it's jittering as it's pushing back all the way down for our 4.5 seconds or so, and then it flies up off the screen and disappears. So we've done a whole lot in just a few minutes with this text. There's one more thing that I want to do to my text, just to play with the face of it a little bit and put some blur on it. I'm going to click on my face, or on my sunflowers track, and I'm going to go down to my filters, and I'm going to go to my FEC effects and find one called Vector Blur. Now you can see what happened. It blurred my text and gave it a different kind of a dreamy, blurry look. What I did is I had moved my cursor out to the timeline where the type on finished. And look what happened. When I dropped that blur on there, it put the effect or the filter right there where my cursor was. So wherever your cursor's at, it's a common mistake and easy to do. You can accidentally leave your cursor where you don't want it. You add a filter and all of a sudden it's in the wrong place because it added it right where your cursor was. The other reason I put my cursor here is because I wanted to see what my text looked like so that when I added this blur, I would be able to see it and not have to guess. If my cursor was back here, I would have no idea what my blur was going to look like. So I put it right there so now I can see it. I like the way it looks. And so now if I just grab that particular track, I can slide it back. So now when it types on, it's got that vector blur applied to it already. It types on, it jitters, it jitters, it jitters, it pushes back, gets to this keyframe down here, and then starts growing really fast and flies off the screen. So look how much we did with that clip in that short amount of time. And of course, if I wasn't explaining it all to you, it would go a lot faster. So it's a pretty quick workflow to do some pretty cool stuff. I'm going to click the apply button and return to my timeline because we accomplished everything on there that we wanted to do. The next clip we're going to play with is our sunset again. We're not going to go make it pretty. We're just going to leave it the way it was. We're going to actually this time take and create a path, a Bezier path, and we're going to animate our text on that path. So let's see how easy this is. I'm going to take my filter plugin, drop it on my clip, double click on the plugin to bring up the user interface, and I need to create a text track. How do I do that? That's right, I heard somebody talking to themselves. They click the Add Text page, and here we go. All right, so I'm going to type in Boris text path. And remember I got that same look that I had before. I got the gray fill with the yellow. It's going to look a little silly up there. First thing I want to do is get rid of that look. I'm going to highlight my text. I come down here and I do the reset style. Puts it back to a default look, which is boring, plain white. So let's work with that and do some stuff to it. First, it's a little big. So let's make it a little bit smaller. This time let's bring it down to about a 48. That looks like a pretty good size. Next thing I want to do is come down in my text generator and find the next little tab along the side called the border, and let's add a border. Okay, if I click here, it will add a border. I click update, and I don't really like that. I don't like the black text around there. Let's have some fun. I'm going to grab my eyedropper, and I'm going to come pick a pretty blue out of my water. And hey, why is it not showing up? Because I haven't clicked update. Remember, you have to click the update. All right, now I've got this nice pretty blue border around my text, but it looks a little big. So let's make our border width a little bit smaller. Let's dump it down by about half. It was set at 2. Let's put it somewhere around 1. I wanted to cut that exactly in half, so let me show you. You can actually click in these numbers and just hit a 1 and enter, and it will do it. You don't always have to use the slider. You can click right in those numbers. Okay, it hasn't changed. Why is it not changed? Because I haven't clicked update. I hope somebody out there said you got to click update, silly. There, I clicked update, and now we've got it. So let's go down and do one more thing to our text for some fun. Let's add a drop shadow. I click on the drop shadow tab. You see it adds here, but not up here because I haven't clicked my update. Okay, there's our shadow. It's a little harsh and edgy. Don't like that. I'm going to dial my shadow softness up a little bit. Let's move it up somewhere around 2 or so. That should soften it up a fair amount. Click the update. I like that a lot better. Now we've got our text set up so we can start playing. Let's go back to our timeline. I'm going to click on my face subtract. And I'm going to go up to my control panel, and up along our options here, there's an option tab called Path. We want to create a path, right? So we obviously need that particular option. Let's click on the Make Path Track. When I click on that, you'll see down here I have a new subtrack called Text Path. If I click on there, it automatically activates my pen tool on my tools bar up here. And now I'm going to actually draw my path. I'm going to click here, come out here somewhere, and if I hold my mouse key, I can create a Bezier curve. This is very similar to what you are used to in other compositing apps and editing applications. It's very common, so I don't really need to tell you how to do that. You should understand how that stuff works. So you can see my text is already hugging that path. Now I just need to figure out how to animate it. Okay, let's go down and click on our face subtract now, and we can start animating this. I'm going to click on my first keyframe. I'm going to leave my key activated in red so we can have the advantage of some of our automatic keyframe additions. I'm going to come up here, and this dial right here is how we animate our text. If I take and click on this dial and turn it backwards, you can see the ease in and ease out popped up. I'm going to dial this back to my text. It's all the way off the screen. Okay, it's off the screen. This one, though, I want to be an accelerate, so I'm going to set that to accelerate. Now, next thing I want to do is I want to come down in my timeline a little ways, just a few frames out here. Somewhere around there looks pretty good. And I'm going to now make sure no keyframes are highlighted, and I'm going to dial my text onto the screen. See, I'm pulling it onto the screen. I want it to go a little past the halfway mark. Somewhere out in there looks good. See, I added a keyframe. It adopted my accelerate. I want this one to be ease in, ease out, so I'm going to set that to ease in, ease out. Now, what I want my text to do is it's come in, it's settled down, and now it's here. Now I want it to back up a little bit. So I'm going to come down my timeline somewhere out here and move my dial back. Nope, we want it to back up. We don't want to, okay, this looks like a pretty good spot. And you see it adopted ease in, ease out. So now my text is flying in, slowly backs up, and now we need to tell it what to do with the last keyframe. We want it to fly off the screen from wherever it's at, and so we're going to turn the dial until our text goes completely off the screen. There. Okay, and that one is an ease in, ease out. I'll set it to hold because once it's off the screen, it's off the screen. Okay, so now we've got our text, flies in, settles, backs up, backs up, backs up, backs up, hits this keyframe, and then shoots off the screen. Okay, well, if you've ever messed with text and animating text, you know that when it's moving fast, it can be real, it almost looks jittery. It looks too clean and crisp, like it was filmed with a really high-speed shutter, you know, like one of those 1,000 frames per second cameras that look so cool on TV shows you see now. That's not usually a look that you want on this kind of a setup. So what we need to do is we need to add a motion blur to make this fly on and look more like the human eye should expect it to. To do that, I click on my text path, or my text track up here, and there's a little option out here with an M on it. That's our motion blur. If I click on there, you can see now I've got a motion blur showing up. And so now, if I were to preview to RAM, you'd see this nice motion blur until it gets here, and then it'll settle down because there's not a lot of movement. And then when it gets out here and flies off the screen again, we're going to have our motion blur kick back in. Now, as a point of reference, when I first started using Boris, I was not able to see my motion blur. So what you got to do if that happens to you is come up to your edit options and go down to your preferences. And there's an option for preview. If you come to the preview option where it says Open GL Acceleration, there's some options here. Pick a different option than whatever's highlighted. Just based on your graphics card and how it handles the OpenGL architecture, that's what will dictate which one works best. It won't be the same for every computer. On my particular setup, this is the one that works for me, so that's the one I have selected. Okay, so we've got this pretty cool text that animates on, has a nice motion blur, backs up, and then flies off. But we can have a little more fun. It's time to play a little bit and be a little creative. So here we've got this text sitting on a shot of some water with waves coming in, and there's waves off in the distance. So let's play with our text, and let's go down to our filters, effects, FEC effects, water waves. Let's add some waves to our text. Whoa, look at that. Okay, so now we got these waves on our text. See how they work? They're a little exaggerated, I think, so let's tone those down a little bit. I'm going to set my cursor back at the front. I'm going to turn this off because I don't need the animation right now. I'm going to take my number of waves. I'm actually going to increase this up to a fairly large number. I'm going to take my amplitude and cut that down so it's not quite as big, and the speed I'm also going to cut down. This would be a spot where a good preview to RAM would really show you what's going on, but I can't do that, so I'll just kind of scrub slow. You can see that we've now got these much more subtle waves going on in our text. It's almost like the water is helping create waves on our text. But there's one little problem I see with how we've created this. First, my cursor was sitting here at 1 second. So as my text flies in, it's pretty, it's pretty, it's pretty. It settles down and it's flat, and then all of a sudden it just goes wavy. That just doesn't look right. So wouldn't it look better if our text would fly in, nice motion blur, and then right here where it hits that keyframe and settles in with that ease in, ease out, where it's like settles down and slowly does it, that would be a perfect place to make our wave start. It's almost like the text flying in created its own sort of ripples in our text. So I'm just going to grab that and move that cursor or that keyframe back to the beginning there. So now when I drag my timeline, you can see it comes in and it settles, and the text all of a sudden just goes blurry or goes wavy right there and goes down, flies off the screen, and there we go. So we've made this really cool animated path with the wavy text and all kind of fun things on there. I think we got it set up the way we want. Let's click the check mark and continue on to our next one. This is where it can get a little crazy. This is where we're going to play with some 3D land. We're going to create a 3D title extrusion on here. There will be times where you just need that title that just pops off the screen more than what you normally would do. So we're going to create a 3D title right here. How do we create a title track? Can somebody tell me? I think I heard somebody say add text page. We click on there. I'm going to type in extruded text. Okay, click update. Well, remember it adopted what we had before, and I don't really like that, so I'm going to highlight it and do reset and see what that looks like. Well, we can work with that, but it needs to be bigger, so let's make this one bigger. Let's bump that back up to a 96 and see what that looks like. Okay, we've got that. We've got our text set up the way we like it. I'm going to come back to my timeline, but this ain't extruded. How can I make this extruded? Well, there's a button here. This is the track shape. Right now it's on 3D plane, but look, there's an option here called 3D extrusion. If I click on there, it updates, and now we have 3D extruded text. See, we've got the bevels, we got a face, we got sides, got shadows. It's pretty cool. Well, you know what? There's an easier way, and you're probably going, then why are you showing me the hard way? Because there will be times when you're working on a text or a title where you realize when you're halfway in and you've done a lot of your typing that, oh, maybe this would look better in 3D. That's the real easy way to change it to 3D. I'm going to delete that. And now up here where our add text page is, there's another little button off to the side, add extruded 3D text. How about that? That'll do exactly what I want. Extruded new line text. Click update, and there, just like that, it was that quick and simple. Okay, I like where I've got that. I like what it's sitting on. I'm going to go back to my timeline. I'm going to open this up so you can see all the things that will appear and happen down here. First thing I want to do is I want to put a shadow in there. So I've got a tab up here in my control panel for my text track. I'm just going to turn the shadow on. I like that shadow. We'll leave it. Don't need to mess with that any. The next thing I want to play with up here is the extrusion tab. We're going to manipulate this a little bit and change the look a little so you can see how some of this works. I'm going to change my extrusion down to somewhere around 3. And the bevel amount I'm going to cut in half, where it's a little bit cleaner. It's not quite so obvious, but yet you can still see it's 3D text. Okay, so I've got some nice 3D text here, as you can see with my background. It all looks pretty good, but it's not very realistic yet. So we're going to do a little bit more with it. I'm going to take my Materials tab, and there's a face count here. We want to set that to 1. And there's a reflectivity here. We want to use that option, and I'm going to turn that up to a fairly decent sized number, about halfway up, somewhere around 50. Oh, I got that one right on 50. You didn't see a lot of change here yet, but once we start working with it some more, that's where it will actually take effect. Now, there's one other thing we need to do to really make this look real, and that's down here along the bottom are some options. There's this one right here, Create Reflection Map. If I click that, then you see down here I now have a reflection map subtrack. And if you look up here closely, the sides and the angles on my letters are picking up some of the colors from my background track. To show you how that works, if I come down here to my media subtrack under the reflection map, where it says V1, I can change that. I'm going to go actually just select a random movie file. Let's pick that sunflowers, and you'll see how it's actually picking up colors, reflections from the sunflowers. I assigned a track to it, so you could actually use something besides what your background is if you wanted to. For this particular one, that wouldn't look realistic, so I'm going to go back to the video one. But I wanted to show you that so you could see how that reflection map works, because it's kind of hard to understand until you actually see the stuff happen. Okay, the next thing I want to do is play with our bump map. Let's give our text some texture. If I click on my bump map, my face count is already set to 1. There's an option out here that is a little hard to see if you don't know to look for it. That's our little checkbox that turns on the bump map. When I turn that on, you can see I now have texture in my text. Okay, right now it's set to rock, and I don't really like the rock, so I'm going to pick the steel plate because that should look pretty cool. All right, so now you can see I've got a steel plate texture on my extruded text. I'm going to zoom in, scroll down a little bit, and I'm actually going to turn my resolution, my preview, up to full so you can see it better. All right, so now you can see this looks like that steel that you see on like toolboxes in the back of work pickup trucks and stuff. what I'm doing is I'm showing you some of this in the full resolution preview so you can see how it looks. But when I'm working, I want to turn it down because we're in 3D land now and it's very processor intensive and I want to be able to work quicker. So I've dropped my preview resolution back to half. I actually want to take my scale on this. Let me zoom that back in so you can see what we're doing. I'm going to take my scale and I'm going to drop that down about halfway. About there looks good. And I'm going to drop my scale wide down an equal amount. So now if I were to click the full preview, you'll see we've still got our texture there. It's just not as exaggerated. It's a little more subtle. That's kind of the look I'm after. So I zoom back out. And now we've got this nice extruded text with a steel plate look on it that we're going to start having some more fun with. First thing I want to do is set my cursor at the beginning of the timeline. I'm going to make sure my main text track is highlighted. I want to go to my position tab and we're going to start animating this. So I'm going to turn my animate button back on. And this time I want to do the tumble. Okay, I'm going to actually set this to constant. I don't want to have a ease in and ease out on this. What the tumble does is it allows you to rotate the text in 3D space, front and back. I just want to move it backwards a little bit so we can actually see the bottom of our text when we start playing with this, so we can appreciate the 3D work that's going on. So if I were to click on full resolution here and zoom in, you can see how some of that reflection stuff is now working on there, and you can see how the tumble has worked. So let's zoom out, go back to half. Now let's animate this. Let's make sure our cursor's at the beginning. And we want to do the spin Y. Let's move it backwards a little bit. You can see it took ease in, ease out. We can keep that. Let's set that to about minus 30 or something, just a number to put a spin on it. And I want to come down to the end of my timeline. And you'll see this is a little bit slower to react when I click on stuff, and that's because of all the 3D work that's going on in the background. It's a lot of stuff going on in that computer. Okay, so now we've got an animated spin of our 3D text so we can see what it's doing. And we can see how 3D looks. And you can see the reflections changing. Let me zoom in on this and turn it to full so you can see a little bit of this clearer. Scroll down a little bit so you can see it better. And now, as I rotate around and run around my timeline, you see colors and stuff coming off of our background. That's giving it this realistic 3D look. Okay, let's go back to half resolution so we can work a little faster. All right, one more thing that I want to do to play with this. All right, now let's think about this a minute. 3D, okay, and we've got this silver shiny material on the face of our text. And usually what makes all this 3D and reflections happen is there's a light source from somewhere off the screen giving us this illusion of 3 dimensions. So if there was light shining on something silver with raised spots and edges, doesn't it make sense there would be sparkles and glitter on there? Well, yeah, so let's add some. Let's have a little fun. Let's go and right-click on our text track, New Filter. This time we're going to go to our OpenGL filters, and we're going to pick one called BCC Glint. If I click on there, boom, look at all that. That's a little much. And look what I did. I had my cursor in the wrong spot, so it added it at the middle of my timeline. I'm just going to drag that down. This is something you'll do over and over. I've done that a lot of times. I'm going to put my cursor back at the beginning so it's where I expect it. Okay, so now I've got this way overdone. I'm going to turn on the full resolution so we can see what we're doing a little bit better with it. And it's pretty drastic. So I'm going to take my threshold for my glint filter. I'm going to run that up to a fairly large number. I'm going to set this on hold or constant and turn that off because I'm done animating stuff. Okay, so I'm going to run my threshold up, and what that does is that determines how sensitive it is, and the higher the number, the less sensitive it is to raise spots to make the glitter or the glint. I'm going to take my brightness, because what I do keep I want to really be able to see, and I'm going to take the scale and I'm going to drop that down a fair amount so they aren't quite as big and obvious. Okay, so I'm kind of liking where that's looking. All right, so now you can see a little bit better. Our text has these nice little sparkles, and as it rotates, I'll click down in my timeline, you can see they move along with it, and you got these nice little sparkles like there's light reflecting off of our extruded metal text. So that looks pretty cool. I'm liking how that works. See how easy that was? Obviously it took a little longer because I was explaining it, but once you understand how to do this, you can knock that out pretty quick and make a really, really neat 3D animated text. So we're pretty much done with that. Let's exit back to our timeline. Click Apply. And there we have it. Again, it's a little slow to work because of the 3D that we were working in. If I click on my timeline, you will see it in its full glory. Now you'll need to render these effects. EDIUS is great about their native effects playing back in real time, and you're aware of that if you're an EDIUS editor. Just so you know, these are not native EDIUS effects, so you will have to render them. Just for an example, I'm going to set the in and out for this 9-second clip, and I'm going to set that to render all. And I'm not going to render it all. I just want to show you that it will take some time to render. And this will give me, it's showing you like 30 minutes there. It will get a little faster as it goes down. It'll probably be about a 15-minute render. It's significant because there's a lot of 3D stuff going on in there. So use it when you need it, but be aware that you will have to do some small renderings on some of those options. The last thing I want to show you in today's presentation is how to create subtitles for your movies and your films and your projects. What I've got here is a 5-minute long solid, or basically a just black color matte. Okay, to equate how this would be used, say you've created a small short film of 5 minutes, and you've created in multiple sequences within EDIUS, and then you've nested all those sequences into a final sequence called Final Movie, and you've now got that on your timeline. Okay, so now you've got this one sequence down there on the timeline that you need to add your subtitles to. Most people that need to work with subtitles don't create them right on the timeline in a text editor. There are utilities that you can get that actually create the subtitle files easily for you. And what I've got is a subtitle file that was created in an external utility that we're going to use, assuming our project is 5 minutes long. So let's go to our effects and put the Boris on there and open up the user interface. Now, first thing I need to do, and this sounds kind of silly, but there's a method for my madness. I'm going to click on the Add Text page, and I'm just going to type in the word text. Okay. The reason I'm doing this is, remember, the functionality of Boris says whatever you use for your text last is what's going to be used next time you activate it in your text generator. So I need to get my text set up for my subtitles. So I don't want my subtitles coming in at 96. I'm thinking 24 might be a little bit better. Okay, so if I clicked update, we can see how big they are. And one other thing is our subtitler usually puts a white background with black text, so I need to make my text black. So let's come down, our fill is on, let's pick a black color for our text. It will disappear up on our timeline, but we don't care. We are just presetting Boris to act the way we want. Now I'm actually going to delete my text track. Now, I've got a subtitle track that I'm going to import. So I come up to File, Import, Import Subtitle File. Okay, I've got it right here, and there's the file I want to use. I'm going to click Open. It's going to bring up this little dialog box. The first time you use it, the Add User Mark for each subtitle will not be checked. You just want to make sure that is checked, and keep the rest of them as a default, and click OK. It'll do its thing. And as you can see, I've got these marks all along the timeline, and I've got a subtitle down here. And along the controls under my composite window are two little marks down here. Go to the next user mark. So as you can see, we're bumping along our marks that are preset down there in the composite window. That's a quick, easy way to navigate them. If I open up this twirl down, you can see every subtitle has its own subtrack under my main subtitle track. So every one has its own set of keyframes already timed and created with its own backgrounds and everything. So these now, you can actually treat these just like you would a title track. So if I were to click on this one, a film by Michael Beer, oh, I made a mistake. His name is really Michael Beer. I live in Wisconsin, and that's kind of something that's popular around here. So let's name him Michael Beer. I click Update. You can see I've now changed my subtitle and tweaked it right there on the timeline. Also, down here where it says a film by Michael Beer, I've got a backdrop. That's how this is defined and assigned. So if I wanted to, I can actually open up my backdrop track and I could change the fill color if I wanted. The fill is turned on and it's set to white. But what if I got a lot of stuff in my scene and that white kind of conflicts with it all? Well, let's change the background. Let's change it to orange because that's kind of the color of beer, right? Okay, we now have an orange background on this one subtitle, and we've been able to modify it just like we would our text. The rest of our subtitles remain unchanged. So if you needed to make one small change to a subtitle, you could make it just because that one particular one was conflicting with the scenery. Again, we're not going to go into creating all these independently. You could, but if you have a need for these, you've probably got a utility that does it for you, so you're familiar with that. And this is how you import the file in. And it just drops the stuff all right there for you. You can modify any of them that you need to along the way. And once you've got that done, it's that simple. You're finished. I'm going to click Apply to return to my timeline. And if I was to scrub through here, we would see our subtitles show up occasionally whenever they should. How about that? Okay, I hope you've enjoyed the presentation today. That's all the fun magic things that I've got for Boris Red and EDIUS. It's a pretty neat little plug-in that's become available recently for EDIUS that just expands the ability of what you can do. It's going to be fun implementing this in more and more projects down the road and take your products to the next level. I've enjoyed doing this for you. Hope you learned a little bit, and stay tuned. Maybe you won. Talk to you later, guys. Thanks.